All right, hello everyone, Rob here with precodecamp.com, and in this video is going to be for those that are interested in doing a little bit of JavaScript along with some HTML. So if we get some form data where we have a number 1 and number 2, and we're going to add them together. So something that looks like this, if I do a 3 and a 5 and I click the add button, we get this little display down here, 3 and 5 is 8. All right. As we're going through this, you're going to notice that it might not be as simple as you might have thought. So make sure that you watch and like this video. All right. So let's go ahead and get into the code and see how we can accomplish this. All right. So I'm inside Visual Studio Code. I just have a simple HTML file open and created. If you are new to Visual Studio Code and you want your setup to be like mine, make sure you take a look at the links down below. We have a video playlist on going over VS Code setup. So again, use CodePen, you can use Code Sandbox, you can use JSFiddle. I'm going to do everything in VS Code, and then I have an extension called Live Server that will allow me to see the web page. So with Visual Studio Code, I'm just going to add some simple boilerplate to this file to let it know that it's an HTML file. And we do that in Visual Studio Code by doing the following. And I'm going to go ahead and minimize this so that way we get more code on the screen here. But I'm going to do the following. I'm going to do exclamation mark tab. And notice that I get multiple cursors right away with Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to hit the tab button twice to get down to the title. Once I'm on the title, I'm just going to call this adding numbers, just so that we can see that in the tabs. That's all the title actually does. Now, as far as the body, I'm going to write in some comments in here on what I would like to do, what would I like to perform, and that way we can strategically go through this. So I know that I need to create a form. So I need to create a form that will have 2 numerical fields for us to use and a submit button. So I need to create a form that has 2 number fields and a submit button. And so again, that's just for me to recognize. Lastly here, to stub out some extra spacing for code, I'm going to go to the end of this line, hit the enter key a couple times, and then I also need to create just a simple div that will display the results. Let me spell display properly. All right, so with that being said, first thing that we need to do is we need to create a form. Right, and we're going to use the form tag for this, and we'll do form, and then I'm going to hit the tab button, and I'm going to leave the action blank. Right, I don't need to have an action here. When it comes to a form, we're going to have a label and input combo, and it's going to look very similar. Once we get one of these items up, then the second one's going to be real simple to do. We'll just have to change a few things. So with that being said, let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a label first. So I'm going to do a label, and then I'm going to hit the tab button, and then I'm going to put num1 on here. This label is going to be called number1 : and then I'm going to have an input field. So the input field is going to be a type number. So I want input, and if you notice on my Visual Studio Code, we may get down here to the number. So we can do this. And the name for this is going to be num1, and the ID for this, and again, I'm just hitting the tab button. I'm going to do num1 as well. And for this form to actually work, I want to make this one required, because HTML has some interesting things that go on in the background that will allow it to know that, hey, this is a form, and if it's blank, let's throw an error. So perfect. I have the very first one done. And we can go ahead and save this, and let's take a look at what it looks like on our browser here. So right here, let me go ahead and refresh. And I already see I have a number 1, and I'm able to type any kind of number in here that I would like. And if I try to type letters on here, you'll notice that the letters aren't going to show up, which makes that nice. Now that I have one already done, let's go ahead and add the next one. And in order to give a little bit of spacing, I'm going to do a break, right? So I want to do a break in there, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing. I can actually, if I wanted, copy this, paste it And if I highlight the num1 in Visual Studio Code and I hit Command D on a Mac or Control D on a Windows computer, I can select each one of those. Notice that I have multiple cursors going on, and I'm able to simply rename this. And I want this to be num2. The last thing that we'll do before we check our work is I need to have a submit button on here. And so I'm going to do another break, and then I'm going to add the submit button on here. And we can either use an input like we have right here, or you could actually utilize a button. All right. So you can either do something like this. We'll show it to you as this. We'll do button, and then the type is going to be submit, and then we can just have an add. Perfect. So let's take a look at what that form looks like now. So if I come back to here, and it's looking exactly on how I envisioned it. Now, if you were to try to click the add button, it doesn't do anything. It would refresh your page, and we don't want it to refresh or anything like that. So we have to add a little bit of JavaScript code to get this thing to work properly. We do have one more thing to do in the HTML, and that is to just have a simple div there to capture the results on what we would like to put on there. So again, let's go back into the code and add that. So I come down here, so I'm at the end of the form, and hopefully you can see that it's really nice having these comments in here to keep us on track. So here I'm just going to do a simple div with the ID being result, and that way eventually once we get to the JavaScript part, we should be able to target this div and replace the text content on it. So hopefully you see a little bit of foreshadowing here on what we're going to be doing. So I'm thinking about just having the JavaScript already on the HTML page just so that we can still see stuff up here at the top, and that way we can still do a little bit of coding all on the same screen here. And if I do need to split the screen up, I can do that to help us see things. All right, so in order to add some JavaScript to this, we do need to have this at the very end of our JavaScript, the end of our HTML file. So that way the JavaScript will actually work properly. So for that, we'll do a script, and I'm going to hit the tab button. And that's really all I need is the opening and closing brackets on this. And next, it's time to things. And I'm going to put some code on here, or a little bit of comments on here to keep us on track on what sort of things that we need to do. So I know for a fact that I need to grab the form element, and in order to do that, again, I'm just going to make some notes here. Get the form element. Next, I need to add an event listener to that element, to that form element, in order to capture it. And then let me go ahead and make this again a little bit bigger for us. So next thing that I need to do with this is after I add the event listener, we're going to have to display some results after we get done with calculating. Matter of fact, I'm going to hold off on those notes until we get inside of the event listener. So how are we going to capture the event listener? Well, first we need to do the following. We're going to do const form equals, and then document query selector form. That means we're looking up here, we're scanning that document, and we're looking for an element on here called form. And once we grabbed a hold of it, now it's time for us to add the event listener to it. So let me go ahead and scroll up just a little bit. And for that, we're going to do the following. We'll do form.addEventListener. And the event that we're looking for is the submit on this. So we'll do the following. We'll say, go ahead and do the submit. And it's going to take a function in here. Now we do need to capture the event, and that's why we put that in the E. And the best thing that I can tell you to do is whenever we're making this event listener is close out the loop because, again, whenever you're learning how to develop and everything, it's so hard to find out the missing square bracket or the missing closed parenthesis. So that's why I say at a bare minimum at this point, feel free to pause the video because this is where you need to be before we start adding some code in here. This event listener, again, we're listening for the submit to happen, and it's going to run this function that we have right here. Now, the thing that I always stress to the students is, hey, before you start doing a bunch of code inside here, just do a simple console log and see if you're able to capture it, see if you're able to see it. Because at this point, there's no point of trying to code any further until we actually can see, hey, when we click that submit button, are we seeing anything in the console? So let's go ahead and do that. We'll do a console log form submitted. So once I do that and I save that, now I can go back to the browser here and let's give it a try. Now, in order to see it in the browser, we're going to have to get into our development tools. You can right click on the page and you'll see something called inspect, or on the keyboard, typically you can hit the F12 button, and that's what I'm going to do. Now, notice that if I click the add button right now, it tells me to please fill out that form. And that's because number 1 and I need to fix this here, number 2 is both required. So if I hit the add button, I don't know if any of you saw anything, but it looked like my browser refreshed. Well, in fact, it did, and that's because we need to prevent the default action of this form actually being submitted. So we'll have to go back to the code in order to fix this, and that way we can actually see the console log happen. So if I come over here and I do an ePrevent default by the following, and let me make this a little bit bigger here for you. This ePrevent default is going to prevent the default actions that normally happen on a form. Instead of it changing the URL like you saw it up there before, we're actually going to stay on the same page, and it's not really going to refresh or change that URL at the very top, right? So let's try this now that we have it. Again, if we want, we can get rid of URL at the top. If yours has something in there, it really doesn't matter at this point. But if we type in 5 here and another number down here, make that 2, you can see in my console over here that it is submitted. It said form submitted. So to me, that means that the event listener is working, and I actually see it in the console, which means I can continue on with my programming. All right, back to the code. And now we need to add a few more things to capture. And this is where a lot of students will get caught up with it adding, because what I tell people to do is let's chunk this down to byte size. Let's store the value that we get from the form in a variable. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say something like this. We'll do const num1 equals, and then it's going to be document.querySelector, and then we want to find, if I scroll up here, we want to find the num1. Now I'm going to change this to number 2 while I'm at it, because this is the label for number 2. So it's going to take a look at our HTML code, and it's going to look for this ID. So it does find it because the IDs match, right? There's the ID. And we're capturing the value of it right here. So let's take a look at this. Let's go ahead and do the next one. We'll do const num2. And that way we have both of them there. And then let's just go ahead and console log for right now. num1 plus num2. Let's save that, because this is where a lot of students will get caught up, like I said, of adding these two together. So back to the browser, and let's see what we get. So I'm going to do 5 and then 2, and then add them together. And it seems like that is not the correct answer, right? 5, 2 is not. And so you have to think to yourself, what does JavaScript do in this case? And so when you're thinking about the JavaScript and what it's doing, you have to think about what type? What data type is this value? And if it's coming from an input field, well, it happens to be a string and it's just adding them together. So 5 and 2, if you add those two strings together, you get 52, all right? We don't want that. We want 7, right? So let's see what we have to do in order to fix that. So in our code, we need to actually take the numeric value of this. And so again, several ways to do this. Some people use numbers, some people use %, and some people just do a simple plus button on each one of these, right? So I'm adding a plus right next to that variable there. So let's take a look to see what our console log is now with our quick little fix. So I'm going to do 5 and 2 again. I shouldn't get 52. Instead, I can get 7. So that is what that little plus sign does. It's going to try to convert it to a number. And because we can't get anything other than a number in here, we're safe to go ahead and do that. And again, you can use %, and I'll put that up on the screen here on what that looks like if you are interested in that as well, right? But just a real quick, simple little plus button did the job for us to get that to where we need it to be. So now we can do the following. Instead of console logging this, we can definitely do const sum equals, and then we'll get rid of the parenthesis, and that's what it should look like right now. So now that we have that, it's time to display the results. So let's go ahead and display the results here. And how do we do that? Well, we should up here go ahead and get the result element, and we'll do something like this. We'll do const result equals document.querySelector #result. Because if we look at this right here, this has an ID, and that gets a hashtag on there because it's an ID, right? So that's all we're doing. And then down here, all we have to do is do result. Actually, I'll scroll up just a little bit here. We'll do result.textContent equals the sum of, and then we did the $ curly boy, num1 and num2 is, and then the sum, right? Let's go ahead and try that out and see what we get. So back to the browser. So if I do 5 and 2, and I hit the add button, notice that I get 5 and 2 is 7. All right. So hopefully you enjoyed that video tutorial, just going over just the real basics of adding two numbers together. Hopefully it didn't throw you off too much, but make sure that you like and subscribe to this video, and we'll see you next time.